Most people think intelligence is something you're born with or something you study for, a test score, a degree, the speed at which you process information. But there's a third kind, one that doesn't show up in any classroom. It gets built quietly, under pressure, in environments where reading people wasn't a social skill. It was a necessity. Psychologists have started calling it traumatic intelligence. And if you've never heard that term before, that's exactly why this video exists. Here's the premise. Trauma doesn't only wound people. In specific, measurable ways, it also sharpens them. The brain, when exposed to unpredictable or emotionally volatile environments early in life, doesn't simply absorb the damage. It adapts. It builds systems. It learns to detect what most people never learn to see. The result is a person who moves through the world with a quiet perceptiveness that looks, from the outside, almost like a gift. But it wasn't given. It was built, in environments where missing a signal wasn't just uncomfortable. It was costly. This video is an attempt to decode something that most people who carry this intelligence have never had language for. If any of it already sounds familiar, stay with this. Think about the last time you walked into a room and felt something shift in you before a single word was spoken. A tension in the air. Something off in the way two people were standing. A smile that arrived just slightly too late. You registered all of it, instantly, automatically, while everyone else walked in and grabbed a drink. That's not intuition in the mystical sense. That's pattern recognition. And your brain didn't develop it by accident. When a child grows up in an environment that is emotionally unpredictable, where moods shift without warning, where the atmosphere at home could change in seconds, the brain does something remarkable. It begins treating emotional data the same way other brains treat physical threats. It scans, constantly. It learns to read micro-expressions, tone shifts, the specific silence that means something is wrong. Not because the child chose to develop this skill, because the alternative was being caught off guard. And being caught off guard had consequences. That early training doesn't disappear when the environment changes. It becomes the default, which is why, decades later, you still walk into rooms already reading them. But here's what most people miss about this. The same system that makes you perceptive also makes you exhausting to be yourself. Because it doesn't switch off. You don't just read rooms, you read people, continuously, almost compulsively. You notice when someone's energy shifts mid-conversation. You catch the word they chose not to say. You replay interactions afterward, not because you're anxious, but because your brain is still pattern-seeking, still scanning for what it might have missed. Psychologists sometimes call this hypervigilance, but in people with traumatic intelligence, it doesn't feel like fear. It feels like clarity. It feels like simply paying attention. The problem is that most people around you aren't paying attention at that level, which means you often end up carrying information, tension, and emotional weight that no one else in the room has even registered yet. There's another layer to this that rarely gets talked about. People who carry traumatic intelligence often feel things at an intensity that seems disproportionate to the situation. Music lands differently. A small act of kindness from a stranger can genuinely stop you. Injustice, even injustice that has nothing to do with you, sits in your chest like something personal. This isn't emotional weakness. The amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for processing emotional experience, becomes highly sensitized through repeated emotional activation early in life. The result is a nervous system that doesn't just observe the world, it absorbs it. At a frequency most people simply don't operate at. And this is where the cost becomes visible. Because feeling everything deeply is not the same as being able to process everything deeply. The perception comes fast. The integration takes much longer, which is why people with this kind of intelligence often describe a strange exhaustion. Not from doing too much, but from feeling too much, too constantly, without always knowing how to set it down. Now here's the contradiction that defines traumatic intelligence more than almost anything else. When things fall apart, when the pressure spikes, when the situation becomes genuinely chaotic, something in these people goes quiet. Strategic. Calm in a way that surprises even them. Researchers describe this as stress inoculation. The nervous system, having been exposed to high-stakes emotional environments early in life, develops a higher baseline tolerance for pressure. Crisis doesn't feel foreign. In a strange way, it feels familiar. And familiar, the brain can work with. So while others freeze or spiral, the person with traumatic intelligence steps into a kind of focused clarity. They assess, they adapt, they move. But notice what this means. The environment that feels most activating to them, the one where they perform best, is one that most people would describe as overwhelming, which raises a quieter question. What happens when things are actually calm? When there's no signal to read, no tension to navigate, no problem to solve? For many people with traumatic intelligence, stillness is the hardest state to inhabit. Rest can feel almost unsafe. The nervous system, trained to stay alert, doesn't easily accept the absence of threat as evidence that everything is fine. It keeps scanning, keeps waiting. Because for a long time, the quiet before the storm was exactly that. And then there's trust. People with traumatic intelligence don't give it easily. Their threshold is simply higher than average. And this is often misread as coldness or distance or an unwillingness to connect. It's none of those things. Cognitive psychologists call it adaptive skepticism. The brain learned early that signals of safety weren't always genuine, that warmth could be conditional, that the person smiling at you in the morning might be the source of the tension by evening. So it built filters, careful, precise filters that evaluate before they open. What this means in practice is that the connections these people do form tend to be unusually deep, not because they are naturally more loving than others, though they often are, but because by the time trust is given, it has been earned through a process most people never even notice is happening. The loyalty that follows isn't performed. It's structural. It's the result of a mind that doesn't commit lightly, and therefore, when it commits, means it completely. The irony is sharp. The people who trust least are often the most loyal people you will ever meet. Here's what's worth sitting with before you close this. Traumatic intelligence isn't a superpower. It's not something to romanticize. The perceptiveness is real, but so is the cost that built it. The empathy is genuine, but so is the exhaustion that comes with it. The loyalty runs deep, but so does the difficulty of letting people in. What psychology asks us to understand is that the human brain is not simply damaged by hardship. It is also, in very specific ways, transformed by it. The way you read people, the way you feel things, the way you stay calm when everything around you is falling apart. These didn't come from nowhere. They came from somewhere. And that somewhere was real. The question now isn't how you got here. You already know the answer to that, even if you've never said it out loud. The question is what you do with the intelligence you built along the way.